Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. If you're making a fantasy-themed game in particular, you're quite likely to have monsters at different points in the game, and you might decide on what monsters go where by hand, as it were. So you might say there's a giant in this castle, there's a goblin, there are a group of goblins in this forest, for example, and there's a sort of dragon in this cave or something. You might also do what in tabletop role-playing games is called either wandering monsters or random encounters, where at particular points there might be monsters, but which monsters there are is random. It's chosen from a list. So you would have an array or arrays that have the names of the monsters and all of the relevant statistics. But there is a third way to do it, which I don't see done very often and which has some advantages, and that is that you generate the monsters themselves randomly from basic elements. And I'm going to read you out some examples of descriptions of monsters that have been generated in this way, and then I'm going to show you the code that allows you to do this. So the creature resembles a horse with the head of an old woman. These creatures have the form of the offspring of cats and rabbits. The creatures have the form of the offspring of humans and apes with wiry silver beards. The creatures have the form of the offspring of wolves and cats with wiry beards. That one's quite similar. The creatures look like disembodied floating heads of withered corpses with long hair. The creatures look like babies from the waist up, cats from the waist down, with silken beards. And I'll just do one more. It looks like the offspring of a human and an owl with a green beard. So let's look at the code. Some of you probably know the game Mad Libs, where you get a sentence, but then different parts of the sentence are blank, and in each blank it's specified what sort of word or words has to go in there. So, for example, you might get a blank space, which has to be a swear word, said the blank space, which has to be a sort of person, to blank space, which has to be another sort of person. Right? That's not a very good example, but you could fill those in and you'd get a sentence. This works in a very similar way. We have pretty much have a sort of basic structure, and the basic structure refers to different subtables. And I'll show you how that works as we go through it. First of all, we have this array. Now you'll notice most of these arrays are two-dimensional, and the reason for that is English changes a lot of words based on whether you're talking about one thing or a group of things. And I wanted to do this in a way that would work for both a description of a single monster and for a group of monsters. So for that reason, most of the arrays are two-dimensional. They have, for example, the creature. Well, you can't say that about a group of creatures. You have to say the creatures. So that's why most of these arrays are two-dimensional. So we have an array that has various options like it, the creature, this creature, the monster, and then another one which is looks like, resembles, has the appearance of, has the form of, and then a third one which is a bit more complicated and has things like the offspring of a human and then it's got bracket capital A unbracket, or the disembodied floating head of bracket E unbracket. And those bracketed capital letters are elements that we're going to get from other tables. And the reason we can do this and that it sort of seems right is because a lot of mythical creatures have very similar patterns. A lot of the time they do tend to be, it's a person with the head of an animal, it's an animal with the head of a person, it's a combination of a person and some sort of animal. So, for example, Minotaur is basically a sort of man but with the head of a bull. Centaur is basically a human from the waist up, a horse from the waist down. What was the other one I was going to say? A werewolf is a sort of combination of a wolf and a person, or at least the sort of modern humanoid form of a werewolf, the way they're usually represented. So because those patterns keep coming up, we can sort of specify these patterns, and the result won't necessarily be a mythical creature that we've heard of from mythology, but it'll sort of sound right. It'll sound like it should be one, if that makes sense. So from these three arrays, you might guess that we're just going to string them together, and you would be correct. So you will just come up with something like the creature has the form of the disembodied floating head of E. And you might think that that's a bit overkill to have a whole array for just whether we're going to say the creature or this creature. Does that really matter? Does it really matter whether we're going to say looks like or resembles? Well, no. And of course, we could have just a single option. We could just always say the creature resembles. But in my experience, it's noticeable if words like that are always the same. After a few examples of it, the user, or at least I, tend to go, oh, I see what they're doing. They're going, this creature is, and then they're just filling in something from a list. Now, of course, they're going to get that eventually anyway, but if we have these little variations, it feels more like natural speech and less like a computer choosing from a list. Of course, it is a computer choosing from a list, but we don't want to give that impression. It feels more like natural speech, and it will take longer, at least, for the person to sort of see how the trick is done. So I don't think it is overkill. You might think it is, but that's why I've chosen to have what might seem to be very fiddly, unimportant little changes. So we start with those three. I'm going to skip these elements until we get to them, but that's the very first thing that we do. Well, no, actually, sorry. The very first thing we do is we decide whether it's going to be a singular creature or a group of creatures. And then we pick an element from D1 and D2 and BF, which are the three arrays I showed you, separated by spaces. Now, there is a new bit of programming that I need to explain that you may have noticed, and I'll go up here to do it. Normally, what I would have done before, what I have done before, is when I have an array like this, I then have a variable, something like that, which is the number of elements in the array. And then if I want to pick something from that array, I will do something like this. Set z equals d1 square bracket random bracket 1 d1m unbracket unsquare bracket. In other words, generate a number from 1 to 4 and then pick that slot in d1 and then set z to be the value of whatever is found in that slot of d1. There is a way that we can do this, and this is what I've done in this example, where we don't need d1m. What we have instead, we can do d1 length, and sorry, we have to put a $sign there, d1 length, and the program will know that that means if d1 is an array, how many slots have been sort of filled in d1. But there is a little bit of a complication to it, and I think it comes from the fact that computers in general, and certainly this program, tend to count from 0 as a default rather than from 1 as a default. If I do d1 length, if I did, let's say, set z equals d1 length, z would be equal to 5, not 4. And I think the reason for that is, as I say, it looks at this array, it sees that number 4 is the highest one that's filled in, and it says, oh, that must mean that it's using 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, so therefore the length of it is 5. Well, for whatever reason, that's whatever the sort of logic of it is, that's what it does. So what we need to do instead is use the name of the array dot length -1. So we can do something like that. Set y equals the length of d1, and then set z equals d1 with a number between 1 and whatever the maximum that's filled in. Or if we want to do that in one command, we would do this. No, it's not going to work today. Oh my goodness. Sorry. So that would pick a, and then we'd actually need to specify the other dimension, of course, but that would pick an element from the D1 array between 1 and the highest slot that's filled in. And so that is the first new bit of coding that I'm going to use in this video, and that's exactly what we do here. If you look at this, we say set y equals d1, random 1 to d1 length -1, and then the other dimension is z, and plus a space. Remember that plus, when we're dealing with strings, plus doesn't mean add the two values together, it just means add this on the end. And then we do something very similar to D2, and then we do something similar to BF. So at this point here, when the computer's there, when the program is there, we might have something like the creatures resemble the offspring of humans and bracket A unbracket. So we have a sort of format, and then we have to get those bracketed capital letters and take elements from the relevant arrays to fill them in, and that is the second bit of new coding that I'm going to introduce you to. So, for example, let's look at E. E means either. Specifically, we've got bracket H, which is sort of human-like elements. We've got bracket A, which is animal-like elements, and then we've got E, which is, well, that can be either. And so what I've done here is, if random 1, 2 equals 1, in other words, a 50% chance, set y equals y dot replace bracket this text with this text. And that's what that means is set y to be equal to the existing value of y, but replace every instance of bracket capital E unbracket with bracket capital H unbracket. There'll only ever be one instance of that, just because of all of the texts only have a maximum of 1. But if there were more than one, it would replace every one of them. So this is the format: the variable name dot replace a bracket, the text that you're looking for in quotes, a comma, the text that you want to replace that with in quotes, and then end bracket. So what we do there is, what that's saying in sum is, if there's a bracketed capital E, replace it with either a bracketed capital H or a bracketed A. And then we start to actually replace these things with sort of proper text. So set y equals y replace, in other words, set y to be equal to what it is now, but replace y with, for every instance of H, replace it with a randomly chosen grammatically appropriate element from the HE array. So we can see that one dimension is Z, which is the flag of whether it's a singular or group. And then we have this, which is HE, and in square brackets, random 1 to HE length minus 1. In other words, between 1 and the highest slot that's filled in HE. And if we look in HE, if we look for the HE array, we can see that it's stuff like a withered corpse, a young boy, an old woman, a baby, and so on. So in other words, replace that with text, and then we go to another page. We're going to do the same thing with animals. And the reason that we have to go to a different page is because we have this. Where's BF? We have this. We have the offspring of A and A2, and A and A2 are both animal-like elements. They're both drawn from the same array, but they have to be different. And the logic of that is if we said, oh, this creature looks like the offspring of a wolf and a wolf, that would just be a wolf, and that wouldn't be a sort of mythical creature. So we have to make sure that the two are different. And the way we do that is in a way that you've seen before, which is we set A to be a randomly chosen element from the AE array, which is the array of animal-like elements. Then A2 is another randomly chosen element. But if A is equal to A2, that's what this double equal sign means. If those two are the same, if we're unlucky, then go to AA2, which we're on AA2, so that just means we'll start again. So to do this, pick two elements from the same array, but keep going until you've got two different ones. And then we do what we've done before, which is replace them. So at that point, we have a basic description of a monster. We could have stopped there. We might have something like, let's say it's singular, we say it resembles H from the waist up, A from the waist down, and that might become an old woman from the waist up and an ape from the waist down. And that could be a complete description. But I've then added some sort of extra stuff, which really just works in the same way. And I'll show you how it works. We set x to be random 1 to 5. If x equals 1, we do nothing. If x equals 2, we give it some sort of description of wings. If x is 3, we give it some sort of description of it's made from a particular material. If x is 4, it has a beard. If x is 5, it has hair, fur, or feathers. And then finally we add a full stop. And I won't go through each of these, but I'll just go through one. Let's say we have hair, fur, or feather. Let's say x equals 5. Up here, we've come up with a description that can be used for hair, fur, or for a beard. So there's two separate places where this might get used, and that's why it's done at the beginning here. So set V equals a random choice from the CO array, which is colours. Set V equals a random choice from the HD array, which is descriptions of hair. In this particular case, you notice that it's only a one-dimensional array because these aren't different for singular or plural. Or it's both, and it's in the order of hair description and colour. So it might be something like matted blue, and you can see how that could be a description of fur. It's covered in matted blue fur. So we have a string, and it's something like matted, blue, or long, or silver, or long, silver, something like that. And if we go down here, we draw from the HI array, which if we go back here we will see is another one of these fiddly little sort of variant words one. It's covered with some sort of way of introducing the fact that it's got hair or fur. Covered in, covered with, or with. Let me get back to the random to the relevant part. So covered in, and then we set y equals y plus u plus a space, of course, plus v, which is the description we've already done, plus hair. That's if this random number comes up. So it might be something like this creature represents an old woman from the waist up, a horse from the waist down, covered in long silver hair, something like that. That's if random 1, 3 equals 1. If random 1, 2 equals 1, it's exactly the same except for fur instead of hair. And then in this case, we can't use the same. We can't use V because matted feathers doesn't really work. Those are only descriptions of hair. So we just have covered in or covered with blue feathers, something like that. This is quite a common structure. If you want to have one of a randomly chosen set of options, you go, if random 1 to 3 equals 1, do this. If random 1 to 2 equals 1, or else if random 1 to 2 equals 1, do that, else do the other, with this number, the second number, going down by 1 each time. And the reason you do that is, let's say there are 3 options. Well, I want to have a 1 in 3 chance of doing that. But if I'm not going to do that, I want to have a 1 in 2 chance of doing that because there's only 2 options left. So if I was doing 4, it would be exactly the same. It would be, or exactly the same format. If random 1 to 4 equals 1, so in other words, a 1/4 chance, do this. Otherwise, a 1/3 chance of doing that. Otherwise, a 1/2 chance of doing that. Otherwise, do that. And if you sat down and worked out the maths, you would find that actually there's an equal chance. Every one of those options has an equal chance of occurring. So you might find it useful to do that if you want to have equal chances of several different things happening at once. And then all we do is add a full stop and print the description. So that is how I generated those random monster descriptions. I think they're quite atmospheric. They do have some disadvantages. One is that you can monsters that exist in folklore, you can sort of have predictions about their behaviour. So, for example, if you meet a ghost, if you've been raised in sort of Western culture, you know that, well, the ghost has probably got some unfinished business. It might be being punished, or it might be the victim of some crime and it might want you to help it. You know, you have all these expectations. You know that a dragon is probably going to have a treasure hoard and it's going to be sort of greedy and cunning and clever. And we know that goblins are sort of mean and cowardly and so on and so on. Whereas with these random descriptions, you don't get that. And so you might get a situation where the player has expectations that aren't met, where it has a creature, oh, this creature definitely sounds like it's a demon, but then it turns out the creature's quite friendly and actually you're meant to make friends with it and that's how you win the game or something like that. And so you might, I mean, that can be good, of course, but if the player has an expectation that they're meant to sort of work out what the creature's like based on their knowledge of folklore, then that might, you won't meet that expectation, and therefore there might be, the player might find that frustrating or disappointing. Also, the player might expect that the creatures will have particular powers, and so, like if it's a floating disembodied head, you might think, oh, it's probably got sort of mental powers or something like that, And if you haven't specified that in the code, which I haven't because this is just generating the description, well, again, that can be a sort of disappointed or an expectation that isn't met, and that can be frustrating. But it does have the advantage that it creates quite atmospheric results, and you don't need that many elements. I've only got. Oh, let me just zoom in. Like I've only got. There's only 9 different human elements and 10 animal elements, and I could, you could easily add more. I've only got 8 different, things that the creature can be made of. I've only got 6 different types of wings, but you still get, quite a lot of combinations. It still seems quite sort of weird and surprising. So, it's another option. As I say, I don't see it used very much. Another disadvantage with it, of course, is that it's text. You can't easily generate a picture of the text that you've generated, and so if you want to sort of represent the creatures in your world with artwork, well, this isn't the way that you could do it. But having said that, it is an option, and it has its advantages. And I hope that was interesting or useful to some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.